Generation Iron 2. Coming soon.
It's often been said that there's no one best way to work out or to train. What this saying means is that you have to experiment. In the beginning, beginners start out with a basic style of training, usually involving training, let's say, the whole body every other day. Let's say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They do about 1 to 3 sets per muscle group, not too many sets. This is to condition their muscles and get it ready for gains later on. In the first, let's say 2 months or so, most of the gains that you make are due to what they call neuromuscular changes. In other words, your strength usually comes first, and the hypertrophy, or the actual muscle size, comes later. Usually after about maybe 2 months or so, you start to actually make actual muscular gains. But you have to kind of condition your muscles. You have to open, let's say, the connection between your brain and your muscles. And that's you do that through using basic exercises, bench press, squat, bent over row. After that, once you do this, let's say, break-in beginning period, then you have to use a little bit of experimentation to find out the best style of training for you. And there's a multitude of training styles to deal with. High intensity training, which involves low volume. In other words, not too many sets, but doing those sets to complete failure. You do, let's say, maybe 1 or 2 sets per muscle. Usually you train about 3 times a week, no more than that. This style was popular with Mike Mentzer, who was a Mr. Universe winner. Dorian Yates won the Mr. Olympia 6 times. He favored the high-intensity training. But, the question is, what does science say about the best type of training generally for most people? In other words, if you want to make gains in muscular size and strength, is there a particular system of training that will kind of like promote that in a safe manner? Now, what they found, we have to go back to the 1950s. Russian sports scientists noticed that a lot of their athletes who trained hard, intensely, in all different sports, they tended to kind of burn out right before the competition. They trained so hard that they wound up overtraining or whatever. So they decided to come up with a system that kind of like spread the training apart in different phases or cycles in order to not overly stress the muscles and allow them to recover better, so the athletes could peak when they should peak, which would be at the time of the athletic competition. This style of training was called periodization. And periodization, as it turns out, has undergone many refinements over the years since it was first developed. And there are different styles of periodization. But the important point to remember about periodization, which is defined as basically breaking your training up throughout the year into different phases, where you vary the sets, reps, the volume, the weight used. All this is done for a particular reason. The main goal being twofold: to prevent overtraining where your gains cease, and also to promote continued gains where you don't hit a plateau and you stop making progress. This is a problem with using the same type of training routine all the time. Now, what the periodization system is based on is a theory developed by a scientist named Hans Selye. Selye basically came up with this concept of the way the body deals with stress, which he called the general adaptation syndrome. This consists of 3 stages. It consists of the alarm stage. The alarm stage is basically when the body encounters any kind of stress. Could be a virus causing a disease, or in the case of exercise, it's exercise itself. Because although stress is usually considered a bad thing, there are some forms of stress that are good, and this is termed eustress. Exercise is a eustress because even though it stresses the body, the results are generally good in terms of health and muscle gains and so forth. So the first stage of the general adoption syndrome, or the GAS, is alarm. That would be, let's say, when you work out. Now, if you work out properly and everything works out, the body accommodates. In other words, for example, processes such as muscle protein synthesis tend to increase. The increased muscle protein synthesis, in turn, promotes changes in the structural capabilities of the muscle, whereas individual muscle fibers actually thicken. And this is what muscle hypertrophy or growth is. So basically, the resistance stage, you can say, is how the body adapts to the initial stress. Now, if all goes well, and you stay in the resistance stage where you, let's say, applying a stress as exercise, and the body's adapting by increasing strength or muscle size, everything's fine. However, if you get overenthusiastic and overtrain or use too much weight, then you enter the third stage of the general adoption syndrome, which is known as exhaustion. When this happens, in the case of a disease, it means that the organism that's causing the disease, whether a virus or a microbe or bacteria, has overwhelmed the body's immune system and caused you to get sick. That's exhaustion in relation to a disease. Exhaustion in relation to exercise would be evidenced by overtraining, lack of gains, burnout, no desire to train, and so forth. A lot of things can cause the exhaustion phase, besides overtraining itself: not consuming enough protein, not consuming enough nutrients, not getting enough sleep. All of these contribute to entering an exhaustion phase in training. Strange as it may seem, most of the people I see in the gym, most of the bodybuilders, they're not aware of it, but they're in a semi-exhaustion state, in the sense that they go to the gym, they work out, but they never make any gains. There's no gains in muscle size. There's no gains in strength. Now, honestly, if you're taking drugs like steroids, for example, growth hormone, that type of thing, a lot of this doesn't apply to you, in the sense that the drugs will tend to block the exhaustion stage, so you can kind of train hard, more often, longer, but still there comes a point where even the steroids and the drugs stop working. I've seen this happen to a lot of professional bodybuilders, where you see one year they show up, they just don't look as good, even though they're taking the same drug program. So even with the drugs, it's possible to eventually reach this third stage of stress, the exhaustion stage. So what does it have to do with periodization? The periodization, the whole concept, was developed to prevent this, this exhaustion stage of stress, by kind of gradually stressing the muscle through various training periods. So basically, they developed this thing, and there's basically three types. It's not really important to remember this. I mean, exercise scientists like to toss around these terms, but for people working out for practical purposes, you don't have to remember these terms. I'm just saying it here because this is what's in the medical literature. But basically, the three types of periodization are what they call linear, which is the traditional. That's the one that developed originally by the Russians in the 50s. And what it involves is breaking your training into, let's say, different phases. For example, the first phase would be called a macro cycle, that's the longest cycle. It can last anywhere from 6 months to a year. And it starts with, let's say, a high volume, low intensity style of training, and then gradually progresses through stages to low volume, high intensity training. But it's an important point is, as the intensity increases, in other words, the harder you train, the less volume, the less number of sets and reps that you do, because if you increase the volume and the intensity at the same time, you're going to slip into the exhaustion stage. You're going to be overtraining, all gains stop. Then they have something with linear periodization. Another phase is called the mesocycle. Then that splits the macro cycle, the year-long stage, into two shorter periods that can last anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. Same principles apply. The third type of phase in a linear periodization program is called the microcycle, and this involves more frequent. This is more familiar to most bodybuilders. because it involves more frequent workout variations, which could vary from either week to week or even from workout to workout. Joe Weider, who I wrote for many years, he had something in his Weider principles. He had something called the what was it called? The muscle confusion principle. And basically, what it espoused was changing your training workout from workout to workout. Basically, switching around your exercise and sets and reps. As I mentioned in another video I did, where I talked about whether it's necessary to change training programs constantly. I don't think it's a good idea, and science backs me up on that, because it takes a bit of time for your nervous system or your neuromuscular response to kind of get used to any particular exercise. And if you change exercise from workout to workout, you prevent this from happening. But what you can change effectively, and this is what I think is the best bodybuilding way to use periodization. This is especially good, by the way, for natural bodybuilders. Bodybuilders who don't use any anabolic drugs should definitely, without question, be using some form of periodization to prevent overtraining, because they don't have that crutch of anabolic drugs to prevent them from slipping into the exhaustion stage. So in that case, what I think is the best form of periodization is what's termed by the scientists nonlinear periodization, or undulating. And undulating periodization is just basically what I described, where you make workout changes all during the week. In other words, let's give you an example. For example, well, let me explain though that this actual concept was introduced in 1988 by a pretty famous trainer named Charles Poliquin, who wrote about it in a strength and conditioning journal. And again, the undulating periodization involves much shorter phases. For example, let's say the first workout you would use, let's say you have 3 different workouts during the week, right? For the same muscle group. The first workout you would use lighter weight, higher reps. When I say higher reps, I'm talking anywhere from 20 to 30 reps. The next workout, you'd increase the weight a bit and use moderate reps, 8 to 10 reps. And you choose a weight where you struggle to get 10 reps. Don't use a weight where you can, you set the goal of 8 to 10 reps and you wind up doing 15 to 20. The weight is too light and you're wasting your time. You have to use enough weight where you could just barely make 8 to 10 reps. On the third workout, you do a heavy workout, which can be anywhere from 5 to a maximum 7 to 8 reps. And again, and what you do is you cycle this constantly. In other words, every workout, you change the sets and reps. And this basically does confuse the muscle, but because you're not really changing the exercises, you're just changing, let's say, the volume and the set and rep pattern, the muscle kind of never really gets used to it, and it tends to foster growth. As a matter of fact, they did a study in 2009, also in a strength journal, where they compared the traditional linear, the undulating, or this workout to workout variation thing, to no periodization. In other words, just normal training where you train the same all the time. And they found that the undulating style, or this changing the rep and set pattern from workout to workout, it produced the greatest gains in muscular size and strength during a split training routine. So I think that about covers it. There's a lot of nuances. There's many ways to use this periodization program, but I think the important point to remember is by varying the pattern of your sets and reps, the amount of weight you use, and exercises over a longer period of time, you basically can kind of foster continued gains in muscular size and strength without slipping into overtraining. On the other hand, if there's any point where you reach a training plateau where, let's say, after a couple of weeks you're just not making any gains in size and strength, the best thing to do there is just to stop training altogether for anywhere, again, you'll have to experiment with this, anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. And the studies show that even after 3 weeks, you don't really lose much muscle or strength. if you've been training regularly. But what you do is kind of reset your neuromuscular and your anabolic hormone pattern. So when you get back to the gym, you'll start making gains again. Don't be afraid to lay off if your body's telling you need to. In other words, if you're not making gains, if your muscles are sore, if you're getting injuries, it's probably a good idea to take a little short layoff to allow your body to kind of rest up and heal everything. So that's basically it. Again, periodization is probably the best style of training if you're a natural. Best style training really for anybody, because again, it prevents injuries, it prevents overtraining, and it kind of like modulates the stress imposed by exercise on the body and the brain. Now, if you want more information on exercise science, nutrition, supplementation, anti-aging, fat loss techniques, hormonal therapy, all of that is covered each month in my Applied Metabolics newsletter. It's 40 to 50 pages, more like a monthly ebook. And you could find it at www.appliedmetabolics.com. I write about stuff that you won't find on any website or any blog. It's all in depth. It's all in plain English. And quite frankly, if you're not subscribing, if you're not reading this, you're missing out on a ton of information, because along with all the science, I'm also incorporating my 54 years of empirical training and experience and knowledge. In other words, I'm trying to prevent people from making the mistakes that I make and I see others make today, so that your training and your diet will be most effective, and same with your health. I'll tell you how to avoid health problems. Again, if you're not subscribing to the newsletter, you're missing out, because you'll never find this stuff on the web. You're not going to find it anywhere else. For 33 cents a day, it's really cheap health insurance. So take care. And if you really want a good friend, again, I'm saying it again, my dogs have been very quiet in this video. They haven't barked once. See how good they are? Go to a shelter, get a dog. They're all fantastic. They will love you instantaneously. They're absolutely loyal. There's unconditional love, the best. Adopt a dog today. Take care.